Welcome to Woods Hole Historical Museum's conversation, Ocean Solutions for a Warming World, with Peter Domenico, President and Director of the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. Dr. Domenico is the 11th President and Director of WHOI and joined the Oceanographic in October of last year. His research uses deep sea ocean sediments as archives of how and why Earth's ocean and climate have changed in the past in order to predict how they may change in the future. At the end of his talk, Dr. Domenico will answer questions. Please put them in chat. The link is at the bottom of your screen. Welcome, Peter. We look forward to your talk.
Great, and good evening, everyone. And it's great to be here. When I was asked to join you all for this meeting this evening, it was really a pleasure to accept, in part because I'm getting to know the community and getting to know some faces. And so I'm just really thankful for this opportunity to start the conversation. And I thought I would just give a quick overview of some of the things we're working on here at the Oceanographic. And since many of you don't know me, maybe perhaps I can start out with that and tell you just a little bit about myself and where I'm coming from. And let me see, is this work? Can you see the slide?
It's working.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I'm going to start with this beautiful photograph of the village campus of the Oceanographic, but I'm going to quickly jump to this, which is the only photograph I could find of me and my family since COVID time. All of our hair grew out, and we're all unshorn for the better part of a year. So. But just a quick note about me and my family. So I was living for 33 years, almost in the same zip code of the Upper West Side in New York City for the better part of 33 years. And about 20 years ago, I met my wife, Yuko. She's from Osaka, Japan. And we have two lovely daughters, Grace, who's the taller one with long hair, and Maya. Amazingly, they're twins, but they're about 6 inches apart. And they're both at Falmouth Academy. So I think we're the first, full-on family to be living in Meteor House for a long time. And that's actually where we are. I can say that we've made the transition from the city to Woods Hole extremely well. Kids love it. Yuko loves it. I love it. So it's been just a great move. And, for some of you who may know this story, but I actually used to come to Woods Hole as a kid. My grandfather had retired out in Nantucket and lived there year round. And we used to visit him when I was very young, until about 4 years ago, until about I was 4 years old. And so I guess I got to know the Oceanographic really quite well. And for those of you who've seen the Oceanus article about me, if you just Google my name and Oceanus, you can actually see my history. I'm actually coming around full circle, and this is actually where I made the transition, right in front of the Clark building. Oh, my cat's very jealous to get on camera here. When I was 19 years old, I actually decided to transition from being a math and studio art major to becoming an oceanographer. And it was actually right in the Clark building where that transition happened. So it was pretty remarkable. What drew me to the Oceanographic was the Oceanographic itself. And what I see is just a really unique time for us in the decade ahead, the time that I'll be here anyway. And all of you on this call are obviously familiar with the Oceanographic, but just for reference, the institution was founded in 1930, so we were going to be having our centennial celebration in 2030. That's important for a number of reasons. One, of course, is we've come a long way since the initial founding by the Rockefeller gift of about, I think it's 2.7 million back in the day. And we've done a tremendous amount with that investment over the intervening 90 years. But the challenges ahead for the oceans and for the climate system, and indeed for humanity, are massive and really require the best efforts of an institution like ours, like the Oceanographic. Really, all of the Oceanographics, and including MBL, need to shoulder the burden for the scientific discovery and technology development that's going to help us navigate the changes ahead, as we'll be talking about in a moment. And so, with over 1,000 staff, about half of whom are engineers, half of whom are scientists, it's really just an amazing place. And what drew me, the reason why I left my faculty position at Columbia University, which is where I was prior to coming here. My last position there was as Dean of Science at Columbia. And the reason I made the move is because I really feel that the Oceanographic is uniquely poised, unlike any other institution, to really make a difference in the knowledge creation to inform the answers that we're going to need in the years ahead. And those of you who've been following the climate crisis and what's happening with the oceans know that we have to act within the decade to avert some of the largest changes ahead. So I just see the entrepreneurial spirit of this community, and indeed of the Oceanographic, as the right community, the right stuff to lead this knowledge creation. I think more so than many of the other institutions that are weighing in this area. So since I arrived on October 1st, the very first thing I did, I think it was probably a wise decision, was to talk to people. I actually used Zoom, just like we're using it tonight, to reach out and talk to 800 of our 1,000 staff in very much meetings like this, groups of 20 at a time. I had dozens upon dozens of these meetings to find out the sort of collective will of the institution about how we can apply our distinctive skills in the fundamental science of oceanography, as well as the technology development for which we're famous, and also this unique access to the sea that's provided by this community and our seagoing facilities and our marine operations. And the larger message that came from these discussions was to transform ocean science for the global good, or put more simply, how can we apply the assets, the strategic assets that the institution has, to really materially contribute to the challenges that face humanity in the immediate time ahead, certainly in my lifetime and absolutely in my children's lifetime. And so transform is a big and admittedly overused word. And so what do we mean by this? Our goal, or my goal, is to raise a lot of funds to allow us to engage our scientists and engage at scale on these really big, challenging problems. Some of you may know that we are the second largest employer on the Cape, other than the hospital. We are the 5th largest recipient of National Science Foundation funds, second only in Massachusetts to MIT. Our total revenues are about $256 million over the last year. We stimulate something like $400 million worth of economic activity across the country and across the world. And it's a remarkable institution. And so by funding and engaging at scale, the challenge is to overcome the restrictions on federal funding to deliver the kind of innovative work that's needed to pursue these kinds of problems. So the way to do this is actually what I did at my former institution, is that if you provide guidance on the right kinds of problems and the resources to pursue those, you can provide freedom and opportunity for our scientists and engineers to give them agency to be part of the solution, to come up, to apply their knowledge, to weigh in on the big challenges ahead. To do this is to embrace risk. As a scientist, I didn't tell you what kind of a scientist I am, but I'm a geological oceanographer. I use ocean sediments as a way to understand how climate has changed in the past. And so one of the things I learned in my career was that the most impactful work that I did was when I had an opportunity to really think outside the box and apply my skills and the contributions from others to go after really tough multidisciplinary problems. So being able to embrace risk and tolerate failure as an institution is really important. And we can do this with this new purposeful investment in people and in resources and facilities to support this kind of work. We can't go it alone, so partnerships are essential. And one of the key partnerships here is indeed with this community, with the Woods Hole community. But of course, it's across the nation and indeed across the world. And my intent is for WHOI to have a much broader international footprint than we presently enjoy. And all this is going to amplify our core federal model. So in this vision approach, we're envisioning a more stimulated, more activated Woods Hole Oceanographic community. So why WHOI? We have these core strengths in oceans and climate research. In fact, some of you may have read just about a month ago, we recently received a gift from Francis E. Fowler IV, who actually lives out in Oregon, who gifted to the Oceanographic a $25 million bequest to start a center for the Francis E. Fowler IV Center for Ocean and Climate Research. We also have this distinctive capability in exploration and discovery and observations. Also weighing in on ocean solutions, that is, how can the oceans, when we look at the climate system, the oceans and the climate system are inextricably linked. They're not separate by any means. Indeed, the oceans can be thought of as the sort of flywheel of the global climate system. And by that, I mean, the atmosphere, like we're just about to see, is capricious and changes very rapidly. We get very rapid changes in weather that go from clear skies to an approaching hurricane in a matter of hours. The ocean, on the other hand, is like this lumbering elephant, very reluctant to change direction, but when it does, it clears the forest. And so it's really the ocean's rule. They're just slow to move. The oceans are also going to be key, I think, to some of the adaptation measures we take as we approach the climate challenges ahead, in particular with offshore wind and aquaculture facilities. And then, of course, ocean health is critical to human health. Every other breath of oxygen we breathe comes from the oceans. And so it's important to be very mindful of that fact. And lastly, a thread that runs through all of this, and a thread that runs through the Oceanographic, is that this is a very entrepreneurial community. I mean, probably everyone in this call knows the institution better than I do, but I think one of the identifying characteristics of the place is this deep sense of discovery and innovation and courage. We build stuff and we try it out at sea, and we drive, I think, some of the innovation that guides really the whole discipline. And our reason for pursuing this now, this focus on transforming ocean science for the global good, is that this coming decade, actually beginning this year, is the United Nations Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. So this is a global effort to understand the ocean's role in climate and how we can advance ocean science to contribute to some of the challenges facing humanity and indeed the planet in the years ahead. So not only is it the 100th anniversary of WHOI, but it's also will be the conclusion of an entire decade of focused ocean research. And it's a great time to really focus on WHOI's vision. I had a meeting with the National Science Foundation Director, Panchanathan. And some of you may know there's bipartisan support for anything, but there's bipartisan support for enhancing the federal research budget for scientific research and innovation. And we actually had a chance to share our vision plan with Panch, and his view is that WHOI's vision is just really well aligned with NSF's new funding priorities. I got a big cat here who wants to get on the screen. And yeah, so we're really focusing on this new funding that we anticipate from the National Science Foundation to drive some of this growth. So I just thought I'd walk you through the very path that we had actually with our scientists over the past several months, just so you can get a sense of where the oceanographic will be headed in the years ahead. There are three legs to the vision stool, if you will. The first is investing in what we're calling inclusive excellence. This is a focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. The ocean sciences are among the least diverse of all the physical sciences. But we really mean inclusive in an inclusive way here, which is to not only invest in scientists, but also engineers and technology development, administrators, bringing really the best of the best to weigh in on these challenges. This is going to be requiring new recruitment and retention policies, as well as some really strategic and quite large investments in our infrastructure. We just hired a diversity, equity, and inclusion officer. Actually, the same woman that I hired when I was at Columbia University. She is now going to join us here at the Oceanographic, leading our diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And it's really just focusing on, WHOI, like any community, is its people, and we're investing in our people. The second leg of the stool is to really drive and lead innovation. To do this, we're actually pursuing an innovation accelerator, which is hold on, I got a cat here that really wants to. Hold on, come on, come on. There you go. Some of you may know what it's like to have a cat or a dog that wants to share the screen. So in terms of driving innovation, it's really an opportunity for us to double down on, I think, what is our core strength, which is courage. We're an amazingly courageous and adventurous community in terms of our willingness to try things out. And if ever we needed discovery to guide solutions to help humanity, that time is now. So we'll be focusing on ocean-based solutions for the climate challenge, focusing on these centers of excellence, like I just mentioned with climate. We just completed the construction of a new, nearly 40,000 square foot building, the really creatively named new Quistit facility. We haven't given it its formal name yet. But this is really built as what we're calling a collision space. So some of you are maybe familiar with Bell Labs in New Jersey. The secret of the success of that, that facility in creating some of the technologies that define our world today was in part this ability of a space to inspire people to achieve multiples of what they would do individually. And a lot of this comes down to building places where engineers and seagoing people and scientists can all collide, where they can work together to explore ways in which they can collaborate, and for us to support that. Collaborating with industry is going to be really critical. I broaden this to say the private sector rather than industry, but it's really the best way for us to drive innovation is to work with innovators themselves. In fact, we just announced a partnership with Analog Devices. Some of you may have seen the news on that a few months ago. We signed a deal for 3 years. They're going to be providing us with about $1 million a year of funds to actually support this innovation, to support science and technology development for pursuing these big climate challenge issues. And lastly, I just want to mention something called ocean shots. So some of you have heard about moon shots. Well, there's an ocean equivalent of these, and actually the Oceanographic submitted the lion's share of these ideas during the most recent United Nations Ocean Decade call. We submitted 20 of the 100 proposals these were proposals for really big transformative ideas. And it was by far, in fact, a factor of 10 greater than our next competitor or next peer institution. So this is really kind of owning the idea that basic science and risky disruptive ideas is what's going to guide us through. And then the third leg of the stool is something that is extremely important to me, which is engaging the world. That is, the work that we do extends far beyond the boundaries of this Woods Hole community. It extends far beyond the state of Massachusetts, where the blue economy is so important, and of course for New England. We are the point of ocean departure for much of that research in the oceans. And so not only are we to engage the Woods Hole community and our friends and neighbors in this immediate area, but really across the nation and around the world. And that's what these partnerships are about, that, all these challenges are bigger than any one institution. And once we approach it with that kind of humility, much larger things are possible than what one can do at a single institution. This is going to be a much larger partnership with the UN Ocean Decade, also with Marine Policy and the Woodwell Center. And it's very important for communications. That is, science isn't complete until it's communicated. And so we'll be investing in our communications as well. And I can sort of walk you through some examples, but really what I thought I would do is just jump, if I might, to the end, because I think this really helps us focus on some of the research areas where we're going to be directing our activity. Three areas that have come from the community are really understanding how the ocean works in a really fundamental way and exploring these kinds of questions as they can inform solutions. So, for example, understanding what's called the ocean twilight zone, which is this level that's about a half a mile down below the surface, where light from the sun becomes extinguished, and it's not absolutely black, but it's a very deep indigo blue. This is actually a vitally important source of sustenance for the ocean. This is where we actually, the way it was described to me is that if you look out on a terrestrial landscape and you see trees as an indication of the health of an ecosystem, what's sustaining those trees, of course, is a healthy soil. And the soil equivalent for the oceans is this twilight zone, this level deep down in the oceans where nutrients and carbon are high and where there's a lot of life there. Really understanding some of the fundamentals of the ocean, of course, tremendously important. And a renewed focus on ocean and climate solutions. And then, of course, ocean health and human lives. And I'm just going to wrap it up with this summary that I shared actually with a group called the Templeton Foundation. And this was actually looking at how can we learn from the most recent pandemic, particularly the journey that we've had over the last year plus, where we now are enjoying the benefits of having a vaccine that was developed in record time, an unprecedented scientific accomplishment. Took century to decades to develop vaccines for typhoid or polio or mumps or hepatitis or Ebola, but only 9 months for COVID-19. And so it's important to kind of embrace that discovery and ask, how do we get there? And so the lessons from crisis, and it's not just the pandemic, but it's also, if we look at big environmental challenges, they have the same 5 ingredients, which is trusted independent science, such as we produce here at the Oceanographic, is bedrock vital. There's nothing that can replace it. If you don't have it, you can't start. A willingness to drive innovation and take risks and to fund at scale is vital. If you take baby steps, you're not going to get there. It takes courage. The need to have a baseline of measurement, so observations and monitoring to be able to track your progress. And partnership, so that word comes up yet again. It's science and industry and policy. Again, the problems are bigger than any one community. And then lastly, it's no surprise, but communications are key. We really have to commit to sharing our discovery with the world at large. So I'm just going to leave it there and take your questions. I can talk for hours about the oceanographic, but I'd much rather hear from you. So thank you very much for your time this evening, and look forward to any questions you may have.
Okay, yeah, you can put your questions in the chat. I'm going to start with a question. I think I warned Peter about this one. Tell me about the new dock that's going to go in, and when and how that's going to happen.
Right. So so the new dock that's going to go in, I wish it were that simple. That was one of the first things that came to my attention was the need. So we have reached the end of the life cycle of our current Island dock. It's a 2-acre facility where many of the pilings we're getting some rust and some cracks that have reached in through the concrete, and it's we're paying upwards of $1 million a year in just repair expenses for the dock to keep it just intact. And so, of course, those expenses are going to increase over time, and we have to contemplate a replacement of the dock. And what I can say at this point is we're exploring everything from just a pure replacement of the dock as it is to something that could support some of the bigger ambitions that we have, to something that can also serve the town. We're looking at a wide variety of opportunities, but the bottom line is going to be cost. Doing anything on the water is expensive, and anything related to oceanographic research is even more so. So we're going to be, I think our options are going to be limited by the kinds of funds we can raise, because we're talking about many, many, many tens of millions of dollars. So it's a big number even for an institution like ours. And all I can tell you at this stage, because we obviously we don't have any, there's no set plan yet. We do have some ideas and sketches of what could happen in this space, but we haven't executed on anything.
By serving the town, what do you mean?
Well, so one could imagine, and I'm not sure where I stand on this yet, but one could imagine a public space that allows people to understand the contribution of ocean science to humanity, and a place for people to wander through and learn about just how special not Woods Hole is even by itself, but just what the Woods Hole community has contributed to oceanographic research. I mean, we have a 150-year history of contribution. We're a world-renowned center, and many people pass through our town and know nothing about it. And one can argue that that's totally fine, and one can also say that's a missed opportunity.
Sure. Okay, that's good. Okay, anybody else have some questions? Oh, yes, here's somebody. Let's see.
Hiroki has a question.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Do you see it, Peter?
Let me see. I just saw that she posted. Let me see. WHOI needs to engage with the international community, given that much of the social, economic, environmental issues we are facing today are global in scale. In your opinion, what improvements do you think WHOI could make to further enhance cooperation with overseas research institutions? That's a great question. So many of the European ocean science institutions have crossed this bridge some time ago. They collaborate across institutions, across nations, and they're much more outward looking than some of the American counterparts. I think part of that is a difference in funding model. Many of the European institutions are funded federally, just straight up. And so it's a very different funding model than ours, which is entirely competitive, where every scientist is working extremely hard to get month-by-month salary support. But I'm not answering your question. The answer, in my view, is being part of these large multinational ocean action initiatives. So one of them is called Ocean Visions. You can Google it online. I'm part of it, as is the institution. Ocean Visions is asking the question: how can we, as a technological and intellectual community, work together across institutions, across countries, to advance the knowledge we need to pursue some of these really large questions, like ocean carbon storage, or feeding the many billions of people that will be turning to the oceans. So a lot of the answers for these are going to come from not a single institution or a single country, but rather our ability to work across nations. And so my stance on this, professionally, even before I came here, has been a real openness and active engagement with the international community. And I think that stance is already different than many of our peer institutions.
So I have two questions that were sent to me anonymously, or like directly to me. One's from Justin Wickens, and it's how do you see WHOI robots evolving over time?
I see them becoming increasingly more capable with lower and lower power draw, and becoming far less expensive than they are now. Oceanographic research is extremely expensive, in part because you're building bespoke instruments or robots that are used for a short period of time for a single purpose, often by a small group of scientists. They do not scale. It's really hard to have a Volkswagen equivalent of an ocean-going robot. But this is exactly why we partnered with Analog Devices, because they actually build many of the sensors that we need at a commercial scale, including chipsets and optical and acoustic sensors that can be used to build out the capabilities of some of these seagoing robots or observation systems without us having to develop the chip development or the sensor development required to solve the problem. So by partnering with a company that does these things already for a living, and they have legions of engineers that work in this space, we can solve some of our problems that are very specific to oceanographic research, like power management. How do you get the most life out of a robot with a given power density of a battery system? And a lot of that comes down to really clever use. Or those of you who are familiar with electric vehicles, an electric vehicle is kind of a souped up golf cart, but if you've driven any of the current electric vehicles, they're far from a go-kart. they have very, very technologically advanced energy management systems. And this is the kind of knowledge system that we want to bring into the robots. So for example, I'll just give you an example of one of the things that's being developed here and elsewhere. As these vehicles or these robots move up and down in the ocean, they go from very warm surface water to very cold deep water. By cold, it's actually below freezing in the bottom of the ocean. And that transition from warm to cold, you can actually draw kinetic energy from that to actually regenerate batteries, to drive a little turbine. Because the heating and the cooling drives an expansion or a contraction of, let's say, a fluid. And that can drive a turbine, which can then drive a generator and then recharge the battery. So as the robots are moving up and down in the ocean, they can actually recharge themselves. So there are a lot of clever things that we can do.
Okay, next question. How do you foresee climate change changing the species that are present in Woods Hole and those species migration patterns?
Yeah, so I mean, there are many super facts, as they've been called, that you can pull about the ocean and the rates and magnitudes of climate change. One of them is that the species along our margins here are moving northward, following the isotherms as the oceans warm, the constant temperature lines, by 6 kilometers a year. So that's like 4 miles a year. On average, the lobsters and cod and some of the marine species that we enjoyed as kids, those are moving northward at an alarming rate. And of course, we're living in the same spot, and our fisher folk are from the same community. So the food systems are migrating as the planet warms. And so that's just one example. There are many others as well. For instance, with the ocean twilight zone, a deep concern at the moment is that an international fishery is emerging to harvest the fish from the twilight zone. This is again half a mile down into the oceans. It's not for human consumption, but for aquaculture feeds and for fish meal feeds. But if we vacuum up all the light from the ocean twilight zone, the ocean does us a huge favor every year by taking up a lot of carbon from the atmosphere and sequestering it down in the deep ocean. It does this naturally. If we perturb this ocean twilight zone in this kind of a way, for instance, we've the key fisheries that we all know in this area, many of them have been overfished. And were we to do that for the ocean twilight zone, it would have really dire consequences for the entire health of the ocean.
Okay. Do you plan to continue with your geological research here at WHOI?
I'm not paid to do that, but I do have postdocs and students still at Columbia, and I would like to still have students through the joint program. In truth, I'm not going to have time. I mean, I have to be really honest with myself. This is more than a 24-hour job. I mean, it's just this is a massive place, and it's really complex, and it requires my full effort. So I think the honest answer to that is no, but I'm going to be in denial about that for a long time and do my best to keep doing it. I actually have a book contract that I'm working on a book right now.
This is from Arthur Gaines, who says, Jennifer would like to welcome Peter and give a public vote of confidence and tell everyone he's been very receptive to learning Woods Hole history as we have chatted in the Redfield Gardens as he learned that he was living in Sarah Bryant Fay's house. Great.
Thanks, neighbor. So I was fortunate enough to be able to have a small plot in the common garden in town, right next to Jennifer, who was very kind and introduced herself to me right away, and even gave me one of her early heads of lettuce. So thank you, thank you, Jennifer.
Okay. Anybody else have questions? We are recording this, and we will post this on our website. So if you want to go over it again or tell people about it, just go to the website. And thank you so much, Peter. We've learned a lot, and we really appreciate your time.
Yeah, and Debbie, I would like to use this opportunity to obviously thank you personally for inviting me, and also this community. But it's just one of the main takeaways for me, having known of this community for much of my life, but now getting to know it a little bit better, is the importance of community. And I want to make it absolutely clear to this group that I'm going to be very mindful of the importance of maintaining that sense of community. And also, I think it's important that that I offer our services to you too. I think it's really important that the Oceanographic get more involved in your work with the historical documentation of this amazing little community.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you.